All right. Shall we begin? Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming. It's great to see you here in person. I know the Sao Paulo traffic can be a challenge. We also are live streaming this. I think we have 50 to 60,000 people on live stream right now. So this is huge. No, I actually don't know how many we have, but I'm sure there's quite a few. I know there's one actually. I sent the link to my father, so he's watching. So if you don't mind, hi Dad, good to see you. But let's get started. Again, thanks so much for coming. My name is Dave Trachtenberg, and I'm the Director of Student Growth and Performance here at Graded. You've gotten a lot of emails from me, I'm sure, so it's nice to see you in person. So the Student Growth and Performance team is a relatively new team here at Graded. We all live in the Learning Lab. We're part of the Learning Lab. And we work across all the different divisions, lower school, middle school, and high school, and even some of the operational administrative offices. And we support anything that they have with regards to data, analytics, metrics, measurements. But our primary focus, our main focus is in the name. It's student growth and performance. So our vision, our mission is really to ensure that the way we operate here at Graded with regards to students' growth and performance is that we use data and we use the evidence that we have to ensure that every single student is progressing in an appropriate way and meeting the benchmarks and goals so that they can achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. Because all of your children are different. Every single one of you's child is very different, has a very different profile. And we're really, really committed to being sensitive and nuanced and adaptable to all the different children, and so that's where our team comes in. So anyhow, there's a lot to unpack there, and that's not really the purpose to this meeting, but anyhow, I just wanted to introduce us. Some of our team is right here. I also wanted to mention at the very beginning, before I start the slides, that putting this presentation together is always a fun challenge. And it's a fun challenge because in our experience, certainly in my experience, and I think experience of my predecessors, we find that every single family comes to this kind of meeting with a very different set of expectations and ideas and assumptions. Some people come here and they already know what MAP is. They've had several children go through the system, they've seen similar presentations, they've read everything online, and they know a lot about it. And so they want to dig into the hardcore analytics and the statistics, and sometimes they even ask questions that we're not even really ready prepared to answer right here. Conversely, we have families who come and they're like, I just saw that there was coffee being served. And my next appointment isn't until noon, so I might as well check it out. So we really do have a wide range of audience hopes and dreams in this presentation. So I'll tell you from the very beginning, what you're about to see is our attempt to try to meet the middle somewhere, okay? And I say that ahead of time because it's important to set expectations, because if you're feeling like we're not going into the level of detail or nuance that's specific to you and your questions and what you want to hear, just because it's not here, it doesn't mean we're not prepared and equipped to work with you. We have open door policy. We communicate regularly with families, and so we want to continue to do that. So don't see this presentation as the one stop, the one time you get to ask your questions and understand. In fact, it's not uncommon for me or members of my team to meet with families throughout the course of the week. We can do it on video call, we can do it in person, to really dig deep and to understand, what your questions, comments, concerns might be. Because like I said at the beginning, every single one of your children are very different, and your needs are different. And so we're trying to do our best to provide the information that's going to be most helpful to our community right now. We're going to dig just a little bit, and then we'll go from there. Sound good? Cool. Great. So again, welcome. It's great to see you. Hi, everyone on live stream. This is our Superintendent Coffee Series, and the topic, we do this every year. The first one of the year is MAP growth. MAP growth, and NWEA is the company. So let's talk a little bit about what that is. What is NWEA MAP growth? Okay, for you to know, this is just good information, helps put things into context, because you see these things in email and documents all the time. So NWEA is the Northwest Evaluation Association. It was founded 1977. It originally started as a nonprofit educational institution, primarily as a research institution. They do mostly research. That's what they do. One of the products, or one of the tools that NWEA releases to the world and has developed over time is called the MAP growth test. They have a lot of different things. They have MAP screening tests. They have a wide range of, a whole suite of products that schools can buy and purchase and have access to. Even parents can have access to a lot of the tools if you go to their website. But we're here to talk about MAP growth because that's what we use. So literally the name of the test is called MAP growth. We really emphasize that, and you'll see why in just a moment. We administer the MAP growth test 2 times a year, okay? We do it in the fall, the American fall, and that's something that's taken me a little while to get used to because I am from the United States. So for me, fall, oh, it's September-ish, that's fall. I've come to realize that's not so obvious to everyone in our community. So we'll say fall, September, spring, May. We'll use those interchangeably, but just know fall, the best way to think about fall is test number 1, and spring, test number 2. Fall, beginning of the year, spring, end of the year. I think that's probably the most appropriate way to think about it. And if you ever get confused, just ask. It's not uncommon for people to get confused. So, like I said previously, NWEA is primarily a research institution. And so they conduct a norms study, a huge norms study. I have it on my desktop. It's like about a 600-page document. It's a very in-depth research study. And they do that about every 3 to 4 years to look at all the data that they collect from all the students who take the MAP test. And I'll give you a sense of what that looks like in just a moment. And then they use that norm study then to determine their percentiles and their norms. And that's the information that I sent to you earlier this week about the norms for every single grade level. I hope you got that. And it's released every 4 to 5 years. We're currently working off the 2020 norm study. We've been informed that the next one should be out in the next year or so. Sounds about right, 4 to 5 years. So we'll let you know when it does. And we're actually, just a bit of a side note, we're really curious to see how this next norm study comes out because that will be inclusive of the pandemic. And so NWEA has indicated a great interest in determining what kind of impact the pandemic has had on student growth and performance on the MAP test. They have decades of data prior to the pandemic. Now they're looking at data after the pandemic. That'll be very interesting to see how that impacts the norms. And lastly, and this is a really important point, and we'll come back to this probably a number of times. This tends to be a point we commonly refer to when questions come up. The MAP test is aligned to the AERO standards. AERO is an organization. It stands for American Education Reaches Out. The Common Core curriculum, you may have heard from the United States, is quite ubiquitous in the United States. Everyone uses the Common Core. And so AERO adopted the Common Core and made modifications to have it be more aligned and more sensitive to American education overseas. So schools like Graded and other American schools all around the world, I'll refer to some a little bit later on, many of those schools, I can't say all, but most of those schools have adopted the AERO standards because they know they're really high quality, they've been adapted for international education. They're very, very similar to the Common Core. That's what MAP looks at, okay? To be very clear. So MAP does not tell you about Graded's curriculum directly. That's not what it's assessing. It's assessing the AERO standards. Now, Graded uses the AERO standards, but to be clear, Graded didn't develop the MAP test. NWEA did, specifically aligned to the AERO standards. That's an important point, and I think you'll see why in a bit. Okay. So in terms of the norm study, we often get asked, well, what do these numbers mean? Who do they represent? What's the group? So here's some information about that. So the norms are based on a K through 12 sample of students. There's about between 3.5 to 5.5 million data points. So every single test score, every single result is considered a data point, which comprises of about 500,000 to 700,000 students, all within the United States in public schools. Okay, so about almost 25,000 public schools, almost 700,000 students all across the United States. They look at all of their data together, they do this norm study, and they determine what's the average score of a first grader in math, reading, language, and science. We don't do science, but there is a science test. What's the average score for a second grader, third grader, fourth grader, based on that norm study, okay? Cool. Now, I know what you may be thinking, because many of you have said this before. That's great that it's from the United States, public schools, but this is graded. This is not a public school in the United States. And you're right, We like to think of ourselves as offering a really world-class education. And there's certainly schools, I'm sure, in this sample that constitute a world-class education, but we really want to stand out also. So we're going to show you some data that I think will give you a bit of a sense of where we stand relative to the data that we have access to, okay? Which isn't just public schools in the United States, okay? Okay, so when your kid sits down at a test, this is important for you to know. When your child sits down at their Chromebook or their laptop, Chromebooks in lower school, laptops in middle and high school, they get logged into their test, and every student starts with a question that's at about the same level, according to their grade level. So all the third graders sit down on the math test, and their very first question is approximately a third grade level question at the 50th percentile according to the norm study, okay? If your child gets it right, the next question gets a little bit harder. If your child gets that question wrong, the next question's a little bit easier, okay? So immediately after the start of the test, all of your children are taking totally different tests. They're still taking a MAP test, it's still aligned with the Aero standards, but it's a different test because your child is performing at a different level. So the MAP test is standardized in the sense that there's a standardized setting, there's a standardized protocol and platform, but it's not standardized in that it's the same test for every single student. So it's critically important for our community to understand, and this is the biggest misconception, that MAP is not an achievement test on a set of standards that all the children should have mastered. MAP is a growth test that gives us really granular information about your child's performance on a very specific set of skills and where they're at, so that we can diagnose and so we can respond. We don't give MAP to rank and sort children. Absolutely not. There's other things we do for that. No, I'm kind of kidding. That's not really our objective. We give MAP so that we can get a much deeper understanding of the skills and knowledge that your child has mastered, what they need to develop, and so forth. And let me give you a little bit of an insight into that, okay? So this visual up top just gives you kind of it is a visual representation of what happens throughout the child's MAP experience. They get a question right, it gets a little harder, right, a little harder, right, a little harder. They get it wrong, gets easier, wrong, easier, right, harder. You see how that goes? Until eventually, the scores start to level out and the test ends. That's why we have some students who finish their MAP test in 25 minutes, and we have some students who take a whole hour to finish their test, because it depends on their rate of getting questions wrong and right, and it depends on the statistical calculation of when the algorithm says, you're done, we see where you're at, so we're gonna make it, the computer isn't thinking that, but that's the metaphor for what the computer's doing. And so it levels out, and that determines your child's level according to what's called a RIT score. RIT stands for Roush Unit. It's only used by NWEA. It's a equal scale that they attribute to different difficulty of questions, okay? So we can use RIT scales to determine averages without there being a skew in one direction or another, okay? Any statisticians in the crowd? No? Anyone not want to admit they're a statistician? No? Okay, great. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the granularity of the data and how we actually use the data. And this is something that I think is really, really fun to share with parents, because we don't get to share this sort of in the emails that we send. All we send is a report, and then you respond to the report. But I think it's really cool to see this next piece. So how can we use the MAP growth data? I'm gonna show you a little bit under the hood, okay, or behind the curtain, what have you. So every single test, every single subject, as you know, we have three. We have reading, math, and language usage. Every single one of them is broken down into specific instructional areas. It's not just math. It's not just reading. What is reading actually testing? Well, we know. Here are the instructional areas. Reading's testing in kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, which we do. Reading tells us about foundational skills, language and writing, literature, informational text, vocabulary use, and function. To say a child scored low on reading is a really broad statement. It's much more articulate and helpful to be able to say, well, their ability to comprehend informational text is quite high, but their vocabulary on the MAP test was quite low, or actually probably vice versa in that case, in that specific case. But the point is, we want to be able to get a much deeper understanding about the actual skills children do well in and where they need some additional support. So these are the instructional areas for reading. We have instructional areas for math, and all of the teachers are exposed to this information. And this is the lens that our teachers, our faculty, use to look at your child's MAP score. Rest assured, our faculty are not looking at your achievement, your child's achievement percentile, and making all the decisions. They're not doing that. What they're doing is they're looking at that and very quickly digging into the instructional areas to really, really understand your child's performance at a much deeper level. And then we have language usage. And the instructional areas for language usage actually maintain consistent through 1st through 10th grade, okay? And this is really the cool part. So after the students take their MAP test and the teachers get the results, the NWEA platform actually very, very specifically provides tools to very specifically guide the teacher to say, these are specific skills that your child needs to reinforce. Meaning these are skills that are just, that your child, based on their grade level and the previous RIT, this is what they need to reinforce, okay? The tools that teachers have access to also tell them what are the specific skills that your child needs to develop. These are skills that they're showing some mastery on, that's their current level, they just need to develop those. And then, of course, we don't only want to focus on students' gaps and current level, we also want to support pushing students to the next level. I mean, that's the name of the test, growth. So we want to look at the next level, so teachers also pay very close attention to the skills and knowledge that students need to introduce, or that they need to introduce to students. So if you can, like, for a minute, put yourself into the shoes of a teacher. You have all your students, and you know the following students need, for measurement and data, for instance, one of the math instructional areas, they need to introduce these skills because they performed at a certain level just in that instructional area. And maybe there's students who just in that instructional area need to reinforce certain skills in geometry. Well, that provides a teacher with the information they need to create a lesson that isn't a one-size-fits-all lesson. They can actually work with this group of kids and say, this group of children really need to reinforce or develop a particular skill. But these children, based on their performance on the MAP test in that instructional area, they're ready to be introduced to new information. Or in the eyes of NWEA, they're ready to be introduced to questions at a higher level, a higher RIT level, okay? This is a really important aspect of MAP, and so this is how we use it. This is how we use it. And it's pretty exciting when the scores come out because it really helps us understand children at a more detailed level. Okay, so you received a family report in the mail. Let's talk about the family report. For some of you, it's quite obvious, but there's maybe some misconceptions, so I just want to make sure we're clear on what it means. Also, very important to remember, your child's math performance is one moment in time. If they took 24 minutes or 30 minutes on a test, your child's MAP score represents 30 minutes in your child's life. We are very cognizant and aware and embrace the notion that your child actually is a wide range and complexity of factors. It's not just one test at one moment in time. It's a piece of data that helps us understand just a little bit better, okay? So also, something important to keep in mind, the difference between growth and achievement. MAP, as I've been kind of saying over and over again, it's really focused on growth. It doesn't serve necessarily to understand how kids compare, but rather how a child is growing. And it's quite common to see the graph over time go up and down, up and down. That's common. It's actually expected because we know over the summer break, over the winter break, over holidays, I mean, humans can be unpredictable. They have good days, they have bad days. So really what we're most interested in over a long period of time is seeing it going up. You know, kind of like the stock market. Everyone who has stocks knows they don't expect it to just go up all the time. I mean, you'd hope it would, but it doesn't. But you'd like to look at your portfolio after 10, 15, 20 years and see that where it is now is much higher than where it was. And that's, in a way, that's very much how we look at MAP. So it doesn't do a lot of good to look at 1 year to the next and get really disappointed about a drop. But if you see a drop over, you know, 3, 4, 5 testing terms, that's when it's important to start asking questions and seeing, you know, digging a little bit deeper. So this is what the growth report looks like. As you know, and I think as we've publicized, MAP used to offer, NWEA had a different report, they've discontinued that report, and this is the one they offer. So this is the one that we have available to us, okay? This comes directly from NWEA, and then we send it directly to you. So you have the subject, it's usually over 2 pages, so math, reading, and then language usage is on the second page. You have the subject. Here we have the child's percentile level, their percentile score. 50th percentile means they're right at the national, or rather the norm study average. Anything above 50th percentile means they're outperforming that average. Anything below means they're underperforming the national average, okay? This little graph shows you change over time, okay? This is a sample student, Johnny Mapper, change over time. Here we have the student's growth percentile. This tends to be where we like to really look to understand how the educational experience at graded may be impacting their growth over time. Because that's really what we can impact the most, is how they grow over time. Because children arrive to us at all kinds of different levels. They arrive at the 50th percentile, they arrive at the 10th percentile, and they arrive at the 80th percentile. So it doesn't do us much good to be really excited about the high ones and concerned about the low ones. We get excited and are concerned about seeing their change over time, okay? Now, the growth percentile, this is something that's a bit confusing, and I want to just clarify here. The growth percentile is actually calculated from fall of 2023 to fall of 2024, not from spring of 2023 to fall of 24. So just to be clear, we just took fall of 24, August, September of 2024. So the growth percentile you're seeing in your report is based on the change, their growth from last year at this time to now. So if you have a student who just entered graded this year, you're not even gonna see a line, you're just gonna see one little dot. And if you had a child here last spring who came in maybe mid-year and they're still here, you're gonna see a little line, but you won't see a growth percentile because that's only from spring to fall. I hope you're tracking. It takes some time to really wrap your head around this. Okay, so we want to end with, I think it's going pretty quickly, so hopefully there's some great questions. We often get asked, well, how does graded compare? You know, you've selected graded, a world-class institution. You want to know, how do we compare? What do our students' performance look like compared to, well, to other places besides just the norms group, which is, like I said, you know, hundreds of thousands of kids in the United States. Well, that's tricky. And let me tell you why it's tricky. It's tricky because we simply don't have access to that much data outside of graded. We get an abundance of data just from graded, but we really don't have access, nor do they provide, you know, access to data from, or result data from really anywhere, except every year NWEA does release an international comparison. And so we do get to see how great, we get to see the average RIT scores of other international school associations. It's just the average RIT, but because we have Graded's data, we know Graded's average RIT score, so we can compare. And we want to share that with you right now, just to give you a sense, okay? So, just for, so you know what we're talking about, these are the 6 international organizations that we like to look at. Have any of you sent your children to international schools in other areas? Maybe, do some of these look familiar? EARCOS or, yeah? Ms. Russer in the back? Okay. Well, if you've traveled around the world a lot and you sent your children to schools overseas, these may sound familiar. The names are, I'm not going to bother you by reading all those names, but those are official names of these international school associations that we get some data to, okay? So just to put it into context. And it's a nice picture of a globe, so it feels like, wow, international school, cool. And of course, we have Graded. All right, so let's talk about language usage. And for the sake of this presentation, we're going to show you an example from lower, middle, and high school. So you're going to see 4th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade. I will tell you that the patterns that you're going to see here apply pretty much across the entire lower school, the entire middle school, the entire high school, but for the ability to be able to see it well and for some clarity, we're just showing you 4th, 7th, and 9th grade, okay? So for 4th grade, it looks like this for language usage. And again, just to reiterate, this is the average RIT score for those grade levels for that subject test, for those entire regions. And we're just looking at Graded. It's really the best we can do in terms of providing some kind of external comparisons, okay? In 7th grade, it looks like this for language usage. And grade 9 increases. Well, it doesn't increase, it is what it is. It looks bigger. And we're actually, for what it's worth, I'll share with you, we're actually quite, these are not unexpected results. Many of our students, I'd say most of our students, arrive at Graded as English language learners. English is not their primary language, and so our hope and our goal and our work really focuses around developing their English language over time. So we expect actually to see an acceleration in their MAP performance as their English skills rise to the level that they would be at their grade level in a native English environment, okay? Now let's look at math. Okay, so here we have 4th grade, okay? 7th grade math. And here we have 9th grade math. EARCOS is the East Asian Region Council of Schools. We know that the schools there tend to be more international in the sense that they tend to have more English language speakers entering at an earlier age. As opposed to at Graded, we have quite a few, a larger percentage of English language learners coming in at a younger grade level. Of course, this is math, so that might not exactly apply, but for reading language is an important point to consider. And then for reading, here we have grade 4, grade 7, and grade 9. All right. Great. So, as far as this presentation is concerned, we've shared with you some background about NWEA and the institution and the MAP growth assessment, how it came to be, how it's developed in some level of detail. We've hopefully provided some clarity around the results that you've received. So hopefully now, when you're looking at your child's report, in fact, as I was walking down the aisle, I think I saw a few of you printed it out. That's great, to give you some level of something to look at that's authentic and relevant to your life. And then we've shown you some comparisons that you can just to see, to get a sense of where our institution stands with regards to the very little data that we have externally for the sake of comparison. Okay? And we'd love to open the floor for questions. Thank you, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. Yes?
Hi, Mr. David. Thank you for the presentation.
Should I, you know what, let me give you the microphone. Is that okay? So everyone can hear.
Just a quick question.
Okay.
Thank you. Is it possible to receive a report including the instructional areas for each one of our kids?
That's a really, really great question. You're not the first person to ask. You won't be the last person to ask either. At this time, there is not a report that exists that includes the granular level of instructional areas. It is something that we're talking about. Maybe it's something we may want to develop in-house. You can imagine it's a lot of data to be able to coordinate securely and send to the right people and so forth. Unfortunately, the answer right now is no. However, this is data that teachers have access to. This is data that teachers are talking about. And this is information that if you're really interested in understanding more, you can reach out to them and they should be able to share it with you. It's not the best answer, but it's the right answer. It's my answer. Thank you. Yes? Can you talk loudly enough? Or?
So, hi, thank you for the presentation. The teacher receives the report and they analyze and apply to the kids, or your team analyze and use it?
Great question. So, what does the teacher receive and how do they get the report from us? No, actually, teachers have access to the MAP platform. So all of the teachers who are involved with MAP are proctors for the test, and all the proctors in a classroom actually have an opportunity, not the opportunity, they have access to view their students' data. And so we developed some dashboards internally to help create some, to show some trends and patterns for them as it pertains to other kinds of student data that we have. For instance, the NWEA MAP website that the teachers access, we call it the platform, is only about MAP, but they don't have like student grades or, there's a lot of data about student learning here at Graded. In lower school, there's a variety of metrics that they use throughout the course of the year. And so the NWEA platform doesn't include any of that, it's just MAP. So the tools that we provide to them allow them to look at MAP and those things together. As you know, to be able to triangulate and to be able to understand all the data in context is really helpful for teachers. But when it comes to just MAP, they access the platform directly. The short answer is we don't send them the stuff, they have it. Good, very great questions. Yes? Great question. Does the university see these results? Not to my knowledge. I think the answer is no. They don't see these results. The only thing that I would share that might kind of approximate the spirit of what you're asking is every now and then a parent will say to me or say to the registrar, hey, we're transferring to another school or we're moving to Colombia or, because it happens, right? We have a transient population and the school is requesting MAP results. Even graded when a student's coming, if a child has MAP results, we may ask to see just because it helps us to understand the child a little bit better, but colleges absolutely don't ask. In fact, that's a strong no. I mean, colleges have a very strict set of things that they ask for. It's widely publicized, it's fairly consistent, and MAP is absolutely not one of them. Okay? Furthermore, I mean, I think just, going back to what I was sharing, I think previously and maybe as I try to thread it throughout, MAP is simply not intended to be an assessment about a student's achievement in comparison to others. That's not what it was designed for. Now, if you want, you could look at the percentile score and that'll tell you your child's performance on that test on that day compared to the norm group. But that norm group can change, changes every 4 to 5 years. So, it's not ultimately designed to be an achievement test, it's really intended to provide us with information about their growth over time. Okay? Yeah.
When you mentioned now the norm group, do you mean class or public school?
The latter, yeah. The norm group, hundreds of thousands of kids in the United States. That's the norm group. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I want to just clarify, I think, a point you made earlier. We actually don't spend a whole lot of time looking at how we compare to those schools. Those graphs that I showed you were more because we understand that there's an interest to just get a sense. We understand that our families are holding us to a high standard, as they should, and we want to meet those standards. But we don't dwell on that data simply because it's actually not even helpful. It's not helpful to know how graded mean RIT over an entire grade level compares to an entire association of children on the other side of the world at a grade level. Now, it might be quasi-interesting. I suppose if, you know, the graded bar was at the very bottom and all the other scores were on top, that would be something that you'd be really concerned about. We would be concerned about too. What we'd rather do, and what we do is we monitor and check students' performance over long periods of time. And we can look at students, of course, as individual units. We can also look at grade levels. So there are times when we see, you know, significant increases or some decreases in, and it's hardly ever significant, but we see increases and decreases in particular grade levels. That's very helpful for us internally to be able to understand what is it about the curriculum, for instance, that might be lacking. Is it actually a gap in the curriculum, or is it simply that we haven't gotten to that part of the curriculum yet? Remember what I said at the beginning, this is all based on the Arrow standards. It's not aligned exactly to how graded school year goes. In fact, I'm gonna make an assumption that many of you picked graded because it's not a cookie cutter uniform standards following school. You pick graded because graded is an incredible place where we really capitalize on the nuances of the child's humanity. I mean, kids are doing incredible things at graded. Teachers are not checking standards off the list. Now, none of that's to say we don't expect kids to know those standards. They have to know those standards. It's not enough to say, well, the kids can't add when they finish at graded, but boy, are they creative. No, of course not. That would be ridiculous. They will add. They will do all those basic skills and all those foundational. They will cover all the standards, but they may not do it at the exact same time and place in the year that a school who strictly follows the Arrow standards might do it. So sometimes, you know, we have conversations with a teacher who's, you know, concerned that their whole class didn't hit a certain mark on something. Well, we look at their curriculum and say, well, of course they didn't, because you're not doing geometry until April. So let's look at geometry in May. It would be unreasonable to think that your children will have grown in geometry in September because you haven't even taught geometry yet. Does that make sense? So those kinds of conversations we have with teachers, conversations they have amongst themselves, really forces us to look deeper into our curriculum and understand the program that we're offering. That's infinitely more helpful and useful than looking at, well, how does graded compare to all the international schools across East Asia? That's just not very helpful for us. So I hope that addresses at least mostly your question. Thank you. Great question, though. You mean in the norm study? Yeah. That's how NWEA, their norm study, I suppose, and I haven't spoken with any of the head researchers there, but I assume that their norm group is very statistically verified way, and that's just how they sample public schools in America. Yeah. So, so it depends. It depends on, you know, whether if it's upper school, it might depend on the subject area, you know, the extent to which the teacher's going to leverage that information. You know, the test is in September, and, you know, it's questionable how long into time that question actually has a lot of value. You know, like you don't want to hold a person accountable to an assessment they took 4 months ago. They've probably already demonstrated a lot of growth and demonstrated proficiency and skills that they didn't on that test. So, you know, the window is relatively short in terms of the utility of map growth, which is why, you know, as soon as a result of it and understand it the best we can. So for instance, you know, tomorrow's a professional learning day. A part of tomorrow will involve our teachers using the map data to better understand their children and to plan their instructional lessons and to focus their strategies around what they might learn from that. In addition to all the other information and data that parents or that teachers have access to throughout the course of the year. Remember, MAP is just one single data point. And there's anomalies in MAP. You know, we see students who just for whatever reason didn't perform very well, but it absolutely doesn't map with the teacher's experience with that child. Wow, this child is absolutely stellar in our class and they're performing at a high level in all the assessments we have, and it just doesn't look like their MAP score corresponds with that. And that's okay, and we just treat it like that. We don't make a big fuss out of it because we know it's literally one single point of data. But
In that direction, do you actually compare the student's performance in the regular test or whatever with the map and see if it's aligned?
you mean in terms of the curriculum?
In terms of the student's performance, say, like you said, if they're
Sure.
stellar in math during the class, is it normally the case that they'll do high scores?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not prepared to give you a correlation coefficient right now, but I will tell you, typically, children who demonstrate a high level of academic skill in their day-to-day experience typically also will show, that will show up in MAP. I was just trying to illustrate the point that there are anomalies to that, and we're aware because kids are humans and tests are tests and things happen. Sure.
First one is, does the peer group only include public schools in the U.S., or does it also include private schools? And the second question is, do the teachers focus mostly on the development areas, like the weaker spots, or they focus on, you know, strengthening the strengths? How do they look at strengths and perhaps point to them versus like gaps?
Sure, great question. So the first question was about the peer group. Just to clarify, which peer group are you referring to?
Like that average that we get.
The thing that I sent you in the mail that was like, here's how the school average, yeah.
We get the kid and then we get
The national average. Yeah, that peer group national, that's based on the NWEA norm study. So that's those 700,000 kids in the United States.
do these kids get their own public schools or the private schools?
Yeah, so earlier this week I sent every single grade level individually. I hope you received it. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. I sent you kind of a follow-up to your child's family report. The family report only shows your child's performance. In the past, and I think I explained this in the email, in the past the report we sent also included the graded average for the grade level, and we also included the norm average. Those two pieces of data are missing from the family report. We already have told MAP they need to stick that back in there. So to rectify that, we sent you this past week the graded average and the national the norm average. So you can compare that with the family report. Okay? Yeah.
If I could just follow up, I think the question she's asking though was, of the 700,000 people in the study, are those only public school students? And my understanding is they are inclusive of anybody in that data set that's in the norm study that took the test at a school that they used in the data set to program the demographic. But they don't tell us how many percent are public, how many are private, or what schools participated.
Oh, yeah. What are they? No. So I think it's safe to say, I would absolutely, this is confirmed in all of my conversations and experience, that every single teacher, if they have 18 students, they're looking out for all 18 students. So if the 18 students all have MAP scores that say all different things, the teacher is really gonna do whatever they can in their planning with their team and their strategy to make sure they're meeting the needs of all 18 kids, whether they're the ones with gaps or whether they're the ones who could use some acceleration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it probably depends on, you know, the mix of kids in the class and how the teacher's going to approach their lesson delivery and lesson design. But, you know, from a conceptual level, I'd say, yes, they want every child to grow across the different instructional areas. It's efficient and to have groups of kids who may have similar strengths and similar areas of growth, and so, you know, looking at small groups or looking at individuals, and that part of that is an indication to the challenge of teaching. You know, when you're presented with 18 human beings to work with, they're all gonna have different strengths and areas of growth, and so being able to meet all their needs is always the biggest challenge. But, you know, as it pertains to MAP growth, we expect and hope, well, we hope and expect over time to see growth.
One way to think about it too is the MAP assessment is this one piece of data, right? Learners learn. It happens in school every day, and there's assessments on that, right? And they're doing the same thing with those assessments, right? So as they see a gap in the student's performance from maybe the assessment they already took as a pre-assessment or over time they're not seeing growth, they're doing all kinds of triaging as well. They take the MAP data that they get twice a year and they augment that into, so it adds to the storyline of the child's kind of overall performance. So I wouldn't suggest that they take the MAP at this one moment and they design for the whole year based on it. They just add it to the narrative of everything they're seeing about the student's performance overall.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. Thank you. Great questions. This meeting always prompts some healthy questions and discussion. Anything else? Yeah, please.
How do you guys think about results not translating to labeling children as, you know, this is the group that has a bigger gap, this is the group for strong students? How do teachers think about not letting results impact treatment in a way that makes it, well, that hurts growth?
Yeah. I'll be very candid with you. I'm less concerned with how our faculty and teachers use this data in that manner than I am how our community uses that data in that manner.
What are your recommendations in terms on how the community and the parents should use this data? Is this something that should be communicated to the child or no, like, is that
Yeah.
parents-teacher communication?
We see MAP as one piece of information that can help us to understand the child just a little bit better in the specific instruction areas that are being assessed. We certainly don't encourage families to use this as a reward, a carrot, or a stick. You know, I've, as you can imagine in my position, I hear from a lot of people in a lot of different ways and contexts, and you know, I hear I've heard stories about parents, you know, maybe sending their results to someone else to share, and from our perspective, it's not productive. It's not productive, it's not helpful. Every single student is different. You know, using a MAP test as an indictment of quality control, it's just simply, it's a bit narrow in view and unsophisticated, and we are a very sophisticated institution. We have incredible teachers who are juggling all kinds of complexities with all of your children. And so, like Rich said, MAP comes, it's a small ingredient into the broad story of a child's experience.